So in the last chapter, we've created two materials or two textures that we can use for, whatever kind of fabric we want. Oops, let me just undo that. Now, I don't really like this one, to be honest, but, I guess it'll do. Especially, well, I guess I could use it at 50%, or if I just scale it down. But anyways, we've created these two textures, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start making details in here. Now, for now, I'm not really texturing anything in particular. I'm not texturing anything on my model. This is just an example of how to add in more details to, these textures so that you can paint more advanced things like pockets, zippers, whatever. Okay, so let's go ahead and just create a pocket, for example. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just go into the pen tool here. And if you press and hold here, you'll get the pen tool. So let's go ahead and just create something like this. And we can always move these points a little bit later. And in the end, I want to do that. So we have this pattern here, or not this pattern, but this shape. And of course, when I select any one of these points, if I go into the arrow and I go to direct selection tool, I can go ahead and just readjust anything I want here. Like that. There you go. So what are we going to do with this? Well, there's a few things. One, I'm going to want to fill it so that I can make a shadow around this, because this pocket will be sitting on top of this material here. I also want to use this as a guide for stitches and stuff like that. So let's do that first. Let's go ahead and add in some stitching. So I'm going to go into paths. First of all, I'm going to want to make sure that my work path is selected. But before I do any of that, the most important thing for me will be to go ahead and just go into my brush. And right now I don't see any of my brush menus here. So I'm going to go into Window and make sure that my brushes menu is visible. So brushes menu right here. And now I will create myself a brush that I can then place along this stroke. So let's scroll down, and I kind of like this thing here. Pick this, and you get something like that. But I don't like the way this, this doesn't really look like stitches. So let's make some stitches. First of all, go into the brush tip shape. Make sure that this is at about 0 degrees. Change the spacing so that you can actually see the, you could make almost stitches out of this. Change the hardness so that each stitch is a little bit harder. And, you can work in whatever kind of diameter you want. And now let's go into shape dynamics. What are we going to do here? Well, first of all, angle jitter. I don't really want angle jitter, but I do want, and I forget where this is, because I don't do this every day. But scatter, I don't really want to scatter any of this. Maybe with a very small amount. And not both axes, but like that. So roundness, no. I don't want any size jitter. Dual brush, no. Other dynamics, no. Wet edges, no. Smoothing, no. So let's go back into here. Okay, where's the, okay, so my spacing is here, but I don't necessarily want to change the angle of this. So if I go to, instead of pen pressure, if I go to direction, what you'll notice is that these stitches now follow the exact direction that we need. At the same time, if I go to shape dynamics, do I want a minimum diameter? Let's choose something like 100% so that the stitches are always equal. Size jitter, not really. Angle jitter, maybe, 2-3%, whatever. Minimum roundness, I don't know, let's use something. So scattering, once again, we have a very, very small scatter. You could do something like that, and then of course you could do something like add a texture to this, just to kind of break up the stitches. And I think this will serve me as a stitch pattern. So with this brush selected, one thing that you probably might want to do is you might want to go into brush presets, or you might want to go into, where's that button? Go ahead and just type in new brush preset. Type in stitches, like that. Let's see what happens when I paint this texture here. And first of all, I should deselect my work path. Go back into layers, create a new layer, and paint this. Now you'll notice that I kind of have stitches that are following my brush stroke. Very, very cool. And of course, I could make this as detailed as I want. And this will serve me to make stitches really quickly within Photoshop. So let's undo all that. And now go back into my work path, select this work path. And now when I right click on this, you'll have something like stroke path right here. So my texture has been, my brush has been selected, my stitch brush. I'm going to choose stroke path, and I want to choose the brush. So I want Photoshop to basically select this brush here, because you could also use other tools, but in this case I just want to use brush. Click OK. And if I go ahead and just deselect this path now, you should see my stitches that were created along this work path. Very cool. But I could do a little bit more with this, where I can now go ahead and just select this work path once again. I could go into edit, and I'm going to change the size of this work path to something like this. I want to go a little bit outside of the initial stitches. I click OK now, and I'm going to do the same thing again, where I will go ahead and just make sure my brush is selected. Right click on my work path here, stroke path, brush. Perfect. Select this tool here, deselect the work path, and now we have two stitches pretty much side by side to create the stitches for our pocket. Well, let's go ahead and just select our work path again, and let's once again go into edit, free transform path, and let's size it up, not too much this time, just a little bit. And of course snapping is kind of annoying right now, so go into view, turn off snap. So now we have much more freedom when we're working with our path here. Something like that will do. And go OK. So now we have a path that's slightly bigger than our overall pocket. And of course, now I will go ahead and just go to fill path, because this time I don't actually want to create, a stroke. I just want to go ahead and just fill path, foreground color, background color. It really doesn't matter at this point in time. I'm just going to fill it in with whatever. And in this case, I think I have a fiber texture going over this, so I'm just going to go ahead and just put this at the very top. And what I will do now is, with this pattern filled, and I really should go down back to paths and just turn this path off because I don't need it right now. I am going to go back into layers, select this layer here, and I'm going to go ahead and just make sure it's filled at 0. What this means is that this color will not be filled, but the shape is still there. If I double click now on this, or I right click on this layer, and then I go to blending options, you're going to get a window like this. I can now go ahead and just create a drop shadow. And when I drop shadow, I can also make sure that my distance is 0 and make sure that the size is a little bit bigger. Change the opacity into something like that. Of course, you could spread it out a little bit more. Again, change the opacity like that. So we have something like this. Of course, we are missing something, and I think I made a little bit of a boo-boo. where I am now missing my stitches. So let me just undo a bunch of stuff here. And you know what, let me just make a new layer, which I'm going to put on top of here. Use my work path, right click, fill path with foreground color. That's fine. Undo that. Double click, drop shadow. Distance of 0. Now the reason why I want a distance of 0 is because if I go ahead and have any kind of distance here at this angle, then what you're going to get is you're going to get lighting from a certain angle, and then the shadow will only be in one part. But really I want kind of like a dark fade off. I want almost like a stain around the pocket. So I'm going to go to distance 0, increase the amount of shadow here, spread a little bit, and of course just fade it out a little bit. Now the nice thing about this, with these blend layer effects, is because, or not because, but the nice thing about them, and I'm just going to go ahead and deselect my work path. The nice thing about this is that I can always go ahead and just double click on this layer, and I can always turn off or on any of these options. I can go ahead and choose an outer glow, for example, or inner glow, like that. And I can very easily create very specific effects. So do I want a jitter? Do I want any more range? I kind of do. I can go over to not gradient, not pattern, color. Ooh, I don't know. I guess pattern could do. In different mode though. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to use any kind of patterns. Now, what I actually wanted is I wanted to kind of have some noise to this overall pocket, but I can always do that later with masking and stuff like that. So for now, this is okay. This will do. Now the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my stitches right here. I'm going to move that layer above that one. And I'm going to start playing around with the blend layers for this one. So I'm just going to double click on this layer. You can also right click and just remember go to blend modes, or rather if you right click you can go to blending options. And I'm going to play with some options for this stuff now. So drop shadow is good, but I need to make sure that it's at 0. Size a little bit bigger. More intense, maybe. Now let's make it slightly smaller. I'm kind of liking that. No, that's too much, you know, so I'm just going to use the keyboard. Just keep playing with these options until I get something that I like. Choose bevel and emboss to give it some kind of depth. And of course, the nice thing about this is that right now I'm getting a lot of variation in the stitching. I like that. Go to OK. So now we have the stitching. Now we have the outside of this pocket. But the one thing we're still missing is we're missing any kind of, well, you'll see the kind of folding that we usually get around, you know, especially between stitches. So create a new layer, choose brush, and this time I'm just going to go ahead and just select this brush here. I'm going to select a white color. Change this layer to overlay because we're going to be doing several things with this layer. And for now I don't need brushes, so I'm just going to select it like that, turn it off. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to zoom in into here. So now this doesn't exactly look realistic, but for the most part I think it's working as it is. And whoa, I don't know what happened here. No, okay. So I'm going to lower the opacity of this brush. Like that. And of course, I'm going to go over this a few times. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I really want kind of like a fade off between these. And of course, you know, you could always vary the amount that they're of these folds, especially. They don't all have to be the same. And now I'm just going to go ahead and just go on the outside here. Do the same. I really want to kind of fill this in. And of course, again, we will be changing the layer properties of this layer in a little bit. I might actually turn it off from overlay to something like normal, and then just fade it out. Fade it in, out, you know, just select something. Now, the nice thing about using normal is that now what I'm getting is I'm kind of getting a color that's being filled between these, you know, these threads here. Kind of like that. So I'm just going to go over this surface here. And of course, once you're done doing this, for the most part, once you're done doing that, what you're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just choose a darker color, and I'm going to fill some of these parts in between with a slightly darker color. So I'm just going to flip this, choose the darker color here. And you know what? I could do this two ways. I could either just keep painting on this layer, which I guess could work, or I could just create a new layer just for flexibility's sake. So I'm just going to fill that in. And don't worry if, you know, if this is a bit much, you can always fade it out later. For now, I just want to fill this in with a darker color. And what I'm doing now is I'm just filling in between these folds to give the folds a little bit more variation, so that there's some more room between the darks and the whites here. And of course, once I've done that, I just go ahead and just change this blend mode to something different. Just going to go to the top and just scroll through the different kind of modes that I have. And of course, I'm just going to lower the opacity slightly. I keep playing around with the blend modes. Really not getting much of anything that's overly interesting. I'm going to go back into my white here. I'm going to change that into something else as well. Not really sure if I like the normal mode. Oh, this kind of looks nice. So let's zoom out and see how it looks. So it looks kind of like that when I zoom out. And you know what? It's not overly realistic, but I mean, if I go ahead and just play with this a little bit more and, you know, just add more realism to this, you know, it's very possible that I could. It's not that difficult to do. Now, of course, this is a little bit too even, so one thing that's kind of missing from this is if I go ahead and create a new layer and just go ahead and, I don't know, fill it in with black or any kind of color, and I go to render clouds. With the clouds option, now what I have is I can just go ahead and change this layers mode to, you know, whatever it is that I want. I can change the opacity of this layer like that. And at the very least, you know, this fabric now has a lot more variety to it. You have the pocket kind of painted in there. Now, the nice thing, of course, about this is that I can now create new paths for any kind of stitches, you know, whatever I want. But basically this would be kind of the way that I would paint these kind of patterns and you know, shapes. So let's see how that looks. You know what? I guess it looks better when it's a little bit more subtle. Something like that. And maybe change this a little bit as well. Stitches I think are mostly fine. And maybe this, change it as well, a little bit as well. And you know what? And of course, the other thing that's of course missing from this texture right here is that there's a little bit of color that's missing. Right now it's just too blue and there's really nothing else going on. So I'll go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to then go ahead and render more clouds. Of course, these clouds I'm going to color. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all, I'm going to fade these out. So fill something small like that. And I'm going to go ahead and just go into hue saturation. I'm going to choose colorize. I'm going to go colorize. I will now choose, I don't know, something, I guess, a little bit greenish, just a small tint of green. It doesn't necessarily have to be all too white either. So when you get something that works, you know, something that you like, like that, go back into image adjustment, and what we want to do now is I want to bring the levels down, because if I just look at this layer when it's at 100%, it looks like this. I don't want that because there's just too much variation in that color. So I'm going to go into levels and I'm going to take down the white, make it like that. I also don't want the blacks either. I just really want less variation in that layer overall. And of course I could always just go ahead and just create a new layer with a sampled color from here. So I don't know, choose something like that, fill it in, maybe even make it more, you know, a little bit stronger. And the reason why I did this is because I really didn't want any whites in here. I just wanted only colors. And again, I really want these colors to be very subtle, but I do want some colors in there. So I have these two layers that are now kind of, well, this one's kind of washing it out, but I mean, if I change my blend mode to anything else, you know, I could always take off my opacity. But again, I just want some color in here, not too much, but something that would, you know, kind of stain the overall denim texture. Now, the one thing I don't like about this right now is that if I look at it from further away, if I go ahead and just look at it from here, you see too much noise. I'm not really a big fan of that. So one thing I could do, of course, is I could just go ahead and just take these noise layers. I could go ahead and just blur them or, you know, do whatever. So I'm just going to try and blur and see what happens. When I go to Gaussian blur, I'm going to increase the amount to something a lot bigger. And I'll do the same thing here. So blur both those textures. You know, it doesn't have to be blurred too much, but just enough to kind of, again, give this overall layer more variety. And I'm thinking this one might be a little bit too much, the linear burn one. So let's zoom in. And yeah, and to be honest, I kind of like that. So now we have a pocket, we have the stitches, we have pretty much everything that we'd need when creating these kind of layers. So with that said, I think I'm going to end this chapter, and I'm going to focus on something a little bit more, I don't know, I mean, there's basically many kind of different textures that I can create using these tools and methods. The next texture I'm going to create is something for, like, let's just say if we were going to make a sweater or anything like that, the patterns are very different, and Yeah, so let's do that. Cheers.